Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alicia Capello, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's session. Before we begin the presentation, there's a few reminders. We do have a code of conduct that we will be using for this conference, and I'm about to post a link to that code of conduct in the chat, as well as an email address to the conference organizers that you can use if you have any concerns or questions. And you'll note that you've been automatically muted as you've come into the room, but during the question and answer session at the end, if you do put up your hand, we are able to unmute you so that you can ask a question out loud. Or if you'd like, you can put a question in the chat or in the Q&A window that can pop up if you open it. The session is being recorded. The recording started automatically when we started the webinar. And if you need captions, you can enable them by clicking the Show Captions button at the bottom of the screen. All right, so now moving on to the good stuff. Today's presentation is the ACRL AI Competencies for Library Workers, and it's presented by Keven Jeffery and Jason Coleman. Keven is the co-chair of the ACRL's AI Competency for Library Workers Task Force and a tenured faculty member at San Diego State University, where he holds the rank of librarian. His responsibilities include investigating and implementing emerging digital technologies and applications for the university library. And Jason is the other co-chair of the ACRL's AI Competencies for Library Workers Task Force and is a professor and an academic services librarian for STEM at Kansas State University. And in that role, he provides instructions, research, and reference services to 7 different departments. So I will let you guys take that away. And
great. Thank you so much, Alicia. Yeah, thanks for attending our session today. So I'm Keven Jeffery, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Jason Coleman, and we've had the honor of serving as co-chairs for this AI Competencies for Library Workers Task Force. And next slide.
Did that work?
No,
sorry.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
No worries. The Jason has to drive since my computer crashed immediately before the session. So Jason and I have been joined in this endeavor by an amazing committee of librarians from across the spectrum of academic library service, along with colleagues teaching in MLIS programs and representatives from our vendors who are developing the software tools we use every day. So this group was assembled back in July of 2024 by Dr. Leo Lowe, president of the ACRL, and we've benefited by a committed and engaged group throughout the process. So our committee engaged very quickly with our work back in July, and we presented a first draft in March of 2025. So there was a public call for comment. You may have seen that across the ACRL websites. And then Jason, Leo, and some of our committee members presented at ACRL to elicit additional feedback. So today we'll talk about the content of that early draft, some of the feedback we received, and go over some of the comments and questions the committee is dealing with right now as we developed our final draft that we hope to get to the ACRL Standards Committee soon. Okay, so why AI literacy for librarians? So in proposing these competencies, Dr. Lowe recognized that we are all, what we all instinctively know, that librarians are intimately involved with information literacy, and looking at the issues of AI literacy, the concerns are largely the same. So AI literacy is an extension of information literacy, and librarians are well placed to engage in this discussion and this work. So library work, is also information work, and information work is changing quickly in the face of AI. So AI will affect the way we discover information, use information, organize information, and evaluate information. And it's something that is probably not going to be avoidable for us information workers. So we as librarians have always taken the responsibility of leading our communities and engaging with information, and we have an opportunity now to shape how AI is applied to our work in libraries. And we should proactively engage with this discussion. Okay, so our charge was to establish a foundational set of competencies applicable across the broad spectrum of the roles in academic libraries. The competencies were to offer a structured baseline framework, allowing libraries to adapt them to institutional contexts and specialties. And we were asked to create competencies that could serve as a starting point for more specialized or advanced training programs. Okay, so we wanted to approach these competencies from a neutral stance, neither promoting or opposing the technology itself. Our emphasis has been on fostering informed critical engagement with AI. We wanted to ground the competencies in librarianship's core principles, especially those established by the ALA. And forefront on our minds were to consider issues of bias, data privacy, intellectual freedom, copyright transparency, and the ethical use of AI. Okay, so it's important to stress that we don't imagine these competencies are a finished or static product. Some of the challenges in developing these competencies have been the changing landscape even as we work on this document. For example, in July, no one was really talking about AI agents, but those are a real concern now. So this document is necessarily a living document designed to be revised continuously. And our committee has actively sought broad feedback from organizations and individual librarians as we've developed these competencies. All right, so we started our process by examining a range of competency and literacy documents we developed by the library community, as well as AI frameworks for other fields. So we cast a broad net and tried to see what competency documents existed and what AI frameworks were being developed. And then we took these documents, we looked for thematic or structural elements that we thought were effective and that we could emulate in our own document. And after debating how we would do our work, we decided to structure our discussions on Bloom's taxonomy as a guide for our work. And you can see here that we condensed Bloom's 6 levels into 3 categories: knowledge and understanding as our baseline, analysis and evaluation, use and application. And then we added a 4th category to focus on ethical considerations, as these were such an integral part of looking at AI. And you can see how the committee formed itself to engage with these categories. So we broke apart into 4 different groups. These groups met independently to engage with these areas. And then we came back together to negotiate the lines between each category and provide feedback to each other. Okay, so each sub-team drafted broad and narrow competencies, which the entire task force then examined to identify areas of overlap and find areas that weren't covered. So around this time, we also sought input from 2 representatives from CORE's Machine Learning and AI Libraries Interest Group, Peter Musser and Andrew Weselick. We talked to ACRL's AI discussion group, and we engaged with the Generative AI and Libraries Conference Steering Group. So we tried to engage very broadly with the community, and all of these groups encouraged us to foreground ethical considerations and to also to consider dispositions in how we approach AI. So subsequently, we conducted 2 more internal cycles of revision review, and then before we developed our first draft. Now over to Jason to talk about.
Great. Thank you, Keven. I see, Steve, you have your hand raised. Is it something do we need to address now, or is it a question that could wait until later? Okay.
In chat, Steve says that it's not pressing, I believe.
Oh, okay. So yeah, in that case, remember your question, and we'll make sure to give plenty of time for questions. So when we met to discuss our initial drafts, we were generally satisfied with the array of topics and felt we hadn't missed any crucial competencies that would apply to all academic library workers. However, most of us felt that competencies alone weren't sufficient. We wanted to explicitly acknowledge that open-mindedness, a dedication to thinking critically, and a willingness to learn are vital prerequisites to competency. That led to the decision to follow the lead of the authors of ACRL's Framework for Information Literacy and add dispositions to our document. What are dispositions? Gabriel Solomon describes them as a cluster of preferences, attitudes, and intentions, as well as a set of capabilities that allow the preferences to become realized in a particular way. Our initial intention was for each subteam to write its own dispositions. And when we examined what they had come up with, we saw a great deal of overlap. And that prompted us to decide to develop one comprehensive set that would apply to our entire document. We crafted 10 dispositions, and many of them were directly inspired by the information literacy standards for higher education, or I'm sorry, the framework for higher education. The first three, as you can see them listed here, call for curiosity and self-reflection. The next four, shown here, collectively emphasize the importance of seeking information from multiple sources and keeping an open mind. And the final three call for us to try to steer AI so that it aligns with our purposes and values. And I know I went through those fairly quickly. Coming up in just a moment, we'll have a QR code that you can use to go to the original draft if you haven't already seen it and read those in more detail. So we have received about 175 responses to our feedback survey that was distributed through many ACRL communities, as well as through the College and Research Libraries News had an announcement about that as well. So the feedback we got has been decidedly mixed, with a number of helpful criticisms and a number of expressions of concern. And the dispositions are particularly controversial, with a few people stating that they should not be part of competencies and others suggesting that they are patronizing. Roughly 10% of the responses we received criticized the overall document, and especially the dispositions, for being biased in favor of AI. In addition, we received a few specific requests to add dispositions to encourage critical thinking about harms, to discourage using AI to replace library workers, and to allow library workers to opt out of using AI altogether. So let's turn our attention now to the competencies. Before discussing them, I want to describe what we mean by competency and characterize the set that we developed. The definition of competency we used comes from Russell B. Edgerton, a former president of the American Association for Higher Education. He defined it in 1975 as a combination of knowledge, skills, and attitudes useful to the performance of important occupational, professional, and social roles. And as mentioned earlier, the competencies are organized into four categories: knowledge and understanding, analysis and evaluation, use and application, and ethical considerations. And here is the promised QR code, as well as a bit.ly that you can use to go to the initial draft that we created on March 5th, was when that was published and made available to the community in general. So each category has 3 to 8 broad competencies, and each broad competency has between 2 to 7 narrow competencies. In total, that amounts to 18 broad competencies and 55 narrow competencies. Oops. So the knowledge and understanding competencies, the high level, the broad categories competencies are shown here. We're not showing the narrow competencies under those, just for the sake of time. And you have, we'll be sharing this PowerPoint, so you can go back to that as well. And Kevin, could you grab the bit.ly link and throw that into the chat, just in case anyone wants to pull that up?
I will do that right now.
Great. So knowledge and understanding. This consists of 4 broad competencies and 15 associated narrow competencies. So the document's overall goal is to provide a guiding framework applicable to all academic library employees and ensure long-term relevance by avoiding specific products or job functions. It suggests that we need to have an intentional breadth in this section, aiming to be relevant across diverse roles and to make it continue to be relevant as AI evolves. Rather than focusing on specific technical details of particular AI systems, the emphasis is placed on establishing a basic understanding of AI technologies, knowing how to stay informed, and critically evaluating information. And these key areas are reflected in the 4 broad competencies listed here, which are to develop a basic understanding of the underlying technologies associated with AI, to stay current with AI applications by following reliable sources from a diverse range of experts, to critically evaluate sources of information about AI for accuracy and bias, and to understand AI-related policies and regulations relevant to your locality. So feedback related to this was extensive. Many respondents questioned the applicability of certain competencies to whether they were applicable to all academic library workers, particularly frontline or clerical staff. And many suggested that perhaps only a very basic understanding might be needed by some categories or some specific positions. Keeping current with applications was noted as particularly challenging due to existing workloads. And I can certainly attest to that because I've been focusing a lot on AI. And oh my gosh, the more you start drinking from that fire hose, the more you realize there's more than one fire hose and it becomes overwhelming. Feedback indicated that while a basic understanding of underlying technologies is important, requiring knowledge of specific technical terms like neural networks or semantic search may not be relevant for most staff. And critics felt the description of AI was insufficient or misleading, particularly the types of AI. They recommended a need for more detail on concepts like training data, bias, data handling, and distinguishing different forms of technology that can collectively be grouped under AI. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Keven.
Yeah, so the analysis and evaluation sub-team developed 3 broad competencies and 12 narrow ones. We were tempted to develop a long list of specific features, risks, and use cases that need to be evaluated, but ultimately we decided not to, as the more granular we made the competencies, the less likely they would be to relevant to most library workers. The features, and use cases are rapidly evolving, and we wanted our document to stay, not to be immediately dated. And we realized that our document would have exploded in size if we'd attempted that. And we have talked as a committee about adding an appendix to capture some of the stuff that we do want to add. But rather than specify exactly how or what a worker should analyze, we chose to focus on the reasons for which an analysis or evaluation should be done. And these were to be able to participate in conversations about how AI might impact librarianship and higher ed, to know what AI tools, what they can and cannot do in relation to library processes and services, and to understand why it might not be appropriate to integrate AI into work processes. And some of the feedback we got on this was, so a significant portion of the feedback questioned the relevance of these competencies to all library workers, particularly those in frontline, clerical, or technical services, or roles not centered on instruction and engagement. And some felt that this document, maybe as a whole, was skewed towards the perspective of instruction librarians. So we did take that to heart. A major recurring criticism was the lack of emphasis on critically evaluating AI tools themselves. And feedback stressed the need for competencies to evaluate AI for accuracy, bias, risks, and limitations. So we have, taken that into consideration as well. And some feedback suggested that we should remove this category entirely. And the argument was that many library workers do not need to be able to analyze or evaluate AI platforms. And some wondered whether it's even possible for us to fully evaluate AI tools, as much of the development is unknown to us. Okay, and then use and application. So this subgroup, so they outlined, so the use and application competencies section outlines the skills needed for library workers to effectively leverage AI tools in their daily work and professional activities. This section features featured five broad competencies supported by a total of 15 narrow competencies. And similar to the approach taken by in other sessions, this task force chose not to list specific AI tools, workflows, or application scenarios. And this decision aligns with the document's overall stated purpose to ensure long-term relevance. So rather than focus on what specific tools are used or how exactly we can use these in everyday scenarios, these competencies emphasize the reasons for which AI application and use should be pursued. And some of the feedback, so a pervasive criticism of this was that the section presupposes or requires library workers to use AI tools to be competent. Many felt the document does not allow for individuals to critically reject or opt out from using AI, even for ethical or personal reasons. Respondents questioned the section's assumption that using AI would inherently lead to efficiencies or improved quality. And critics highlighted the need to integrate ethical considerations even more deeply into the use section, feeling it promoted use without sufficient attention to ethical concerns, privacy, labor, or environmental impacts. So suggestions included reframing the language to focus on the capability to use AI, explicitly mentioning evaluating when AI is not appropriate. Okay, and this feedback has led to a philosophical discussion between Jason, myself, and the rest of the committee of how librarians as a discipline might need to react to or define the use of AI. And if, as members of an academic community, can we opt out of AI entirely if we have ethical concerns based on the demands of our institution to engage with these tools, especially where it may be integrated into our university's strategic plans? So I know my institution, the California State University, they had a lot of press after they announced a landmark initiative to become the nation's first and largest AI empowered university system, and we all gained access to ChatGPT. So how do I avoid using AI, or can I avoid using AI entirely when the students in the community are using it? So this has been an ongoing discussion in the committee, and has led to the discussion of, as we'll talk about going forward, the foundational versus advanced competencies, and if we can kind of fit some wiggle room into allowing ethically opting out of AI. Jason?
Okay. So the ethical considerations that you see here are primarily based upon our review of AI literacy frameworks, of which there are several, and many of them emphasize ethics as a key component. But we had a strong desire to connect this to ALA's core values rather than just adopt another framework of ethical considerations that other agent groups have put forward. And the core values document has as its components, as you can see, access, equity, intellectual freedom, public good, and sustainability. And so we ended up mapping those pretty directly into the competencies that we placed under this category. So one of the first one for access is that we emphasize the need to remove barriers to accessing technology and learning about AI in this particular case. Second, we address bias in data and algorithms. Third, protect privacy and property rights. Fourth, accountability throughout and verify the accuracy of outputs. And fifth, select systems that are more collaborative with humans and have less of an impact on the environment. So we did get a fair amount of feedback about these, actually quite a bit. So one of the major critiques was a desire for stronger criticism or judgments about AI. Like we said earlier, many people felt that we were being overly pro-AI. So we are contemplating providing a resource for being critical and constructive, even hopeful about AI generally. And rather than simply rejecting or resisting AI overall, to take a proactive design approach is what we want to emphasize. There's also a desire for more specifics, and this is tricky for us. Many of us, myself included, felt like we wanted to be a lot more specific. It became a challenge, though, recognizing that if we want this to be a long-lived document and not be, obsolete in like 2 seconds after it's posted, we needed to have more fundamental, broad frameworks. But at the same time, the idea behind this, as Keven had mentioned earlier, is other groups to take this up and instantiate it in different ways that would be applicable to their categories or their types of roles or the people they serve. So another criticism would be that we should suggest stronger actions rather than having it be statements of being aware of things, rather suggest that people do things. Okay, so now on to the part that nobody has seen before, other than those people who are in our group. So we've presented before at ACRL and for Carly and a couple of other venues, but this is brand new, hot off the presses. So we have changed many things for our second draft, and you can see here a list of some of the major changes. One of them is that we reduced the number of dispositions and changed them so that they're now called mindsets. We also chose to forefront ethical considerations because those stood out in the criticism we got as being something we needed to pay more attention to. And we agreed with that emphatically. We expanded the introduction by adding additional context and to particularly make it not seem or not be overly pro-AI. We separated the competencies into foundational and advanced competencies as well. So content enhancements that we made were that we wanted to include a broader institutional and societal context in the introduction, which we did. More nuanced and ethical language has been included. We added additional examples. We placed greater emphasis on core values and explicitly stated that we believe that librarians should have the option to avoid using AI if it conflicts with their personal values. We also revised language to be more inclusive and philosophical. So the guiding mindsets, as I mentioned, we abandoned the idea of dispositions and turned to mindsets instead. And 5 in particular are what we ended up coming with. Curiosity, and by that we mean remain open to exploring both the potential and the limits of AI tools. Skepticism, approach AI claims critically, questioning assumptions, results, and representations. Judgment, we need to balance evidence, institutional context, and community when making or advising on AI-related decisions. Responsibility, we need to recognize the importance of thoughtful evaluation and ethical consideration as acts of care and stewardship for our community. And collaboration, we need to seek diverse perspectives when assessing AI tools and systems. So we posit that these mindsets are not fixed traits. Rather, they are guided orientations that help individuals navigate AI's evolving role in higher education and librarianship. So, as I mentioned, we are putting ethical considerations at the forefront. We didn't drastically change the content here. We still have them connected to ALA's core values, but we did want to make the verbs more active, and instead of implying that you just need to be aware of these issues, we are changing that language to say we should strive in our own use and within our organizations to do particular things to make sure that we are applying this ethically to the extent possible. So you can see the 5 competencies, high-level competencies that we've listed here. And the first one being facilitate and advocate for more equitable access to AI technologies and AI literacy. Second, promote fairness in the use of data and the design of AI systems. Third, protect individual autonomy and privacy rights, cultural diversity, and intellectual property rights. Fourth, ensure appropriate accountability for the design and use of AI systems, including transparency, explainability, accuracy, and reliability. And fifth, consider the broader impacts of AI on communities, workers, and the environment. And so actually, so that one's just a consider. I don't know. It'd be nice if we, we can try to change that to more active, constructive action, proactive. So the second area is knowledge and understanding. And here we made several tweaks, especially to the narrow competencies. But here I'm just showing the top level ones for the sake of time. They are to develop a basic understanding of the underlying technologies, understand AI attribution and detection, stay current with AI applications by following reliable sources from a diverse range of experts, critically evaluate sources of information about AI for accuracy and bias, and understand AI-related policies and regulations relevant to your context. Okay, I'm going to turn it over again to Keven to talk about the last two areas, and then we're going to have time for some questions.
Yeah, so here's our last foundational competency analysis and evaluation. So the broad level ones, and of course, there are about 5 subcategories for each, explaining how you might do this or do each of them. But the first is explain how AI can impact academia, teaching, learning, and research. And the next to evaluate the benefits and risks in the development or deployment of AI technologies. And then this one is one of the things, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but so this is our advanced competency. So the idea was if you did want to opt out of using AI in your own work, you could avoid this competency and just concentrate on the foundational ones. So the advanced competency for use and evaluation, we ask that librarians evaluate AI tools in the context of specific library tasks and services, use AI to facilitate communication and collaboration in the workplace, apply AI for task efficiency and quality enhancement, develop effective prompting strategy for optimal AI output, explore the capabilities of AI for innovation, and select AI tools that are designed for accessibility and usability. All right, so now, so this document is back with our committee who are providing feedback on the latest draft. And some of the questions we're mulling over is, can we further clarify technical terms for broader accessibility? Can we better emphasize that AI use is optional and ethical evaluation should be valued along with technical implementation? And can we better reflect diverse contexts, resource disparities, and a global perspective? And can we add concrete examples? And this is something we've struggled with. As Jason mentioned, we want to keep this document evergreen, so adding concrete examples is difficult if that's going to happen. And can we engage more broadly with the ethical impacts on labor, surveillance, and mental health? And can we better align with existing ALA documents and ensure that what we ask is realistic of all library workers? And I think Jason and I and the committee have we have these two nagging questions. As Jason mentioned, is there a place for dispositions or mindsets in a competency document at all? And can we as library professionals be competent with AI, even if we choose not to use AI? So those are two remaining questions that we struggle with. Maybe you all can help. I don't know. There we go.
Okay, yes, and we welcome your questions, your feedback as well. And you may be wondering why didn't we share what the draft is? It's because really we still haven't tweaked it right, so we don't want to let it out into the wild for and people start to think this is what we're going to do exactly, because we may make some substantive changes to it still. But that you get a flavor for the types of things that we have been proposing to change. And yeah, so we'll open it up to questions. It looks like we have about 9 minutes. And Alicia, are you moderating this part, or how do we?
Sure.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
I just want to remind people that if you want to ask your question out loud, feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you. But we do have one question or a couple questions in the chat. So do you think new librarians will get hired at a university if they refuse to use AI and say that during an interview?
Yeah, that's a very
Uh,
interesting question.
I think that's a great question. I think it'll depend completely on context. Like
It'll
if you're
de
working at San Diego State, no, you're not going to be hired.
well,
I
it
bet.
looking at my colleagues, it might depend on the hiring committee, you know. So
Oh, no.
we're still
But
kind of divided as a faculty.
yeah, but there are a lot of initiatives. You know, a lot of universities are starting to require that their students all have some exposure to AI at some level. Like correct me if I'm wrong, but Ohio State University, I'm pretty sure is implementing a general education requirement, and I think other university systems are doing that too. So, I think if we're going to be effective as librarians working in that kind of an environment, it would be just not appropriate to not know anything about AI. But it's a very tricky wicket, right?
Jason brought this up with discussion. It's one of those things where like, can we like we're at a moment in time where maybe like we wondered if we're being too soft on, the use of AI. Maybe we need to go all in. It's hard to navigate that as a lot of our colleagues still are very apprehensive of AI. So we want to kind of welcome them into the fold to explore more about AI in kind of create a safe space with these competencies. But
Yeah, and I think we could talk forever about this. I just want to say one more thing. Um, One of the initiatives that I think is going to happen is really focusing on safe AI implementation. So, for instance, locally, we have installed open models on our own servers, so people can interact with those, and we can provide pretty strong guarantees that none of the data is going to go anywhere. So privacy is going to be secured. And yeah, a lot of safety concerns are going to be addressed there. So people can begin to understand what these systems can and can't do. Uh, but anyway, hopefully we address that question appropriately. If not, let us know.
As sort of a link to that first question, so Deborah in the chat was asking too, but can AI use be truly optional depending on your position? So if you're an instruction librarian, how do you tell faculty who want this integrated into their instruction session?
Hmm. Um, I'll start with this because I am an instructional librarian. Um, and yeah, that's something that I think about a lot. I'm a STEM librarian, and the engineering faculty and biology faculty are very excited to help me give guidance to their graduate students and undergrads as well about what's appropriate use, what benefit these tools may or may not have for their research processes. Um, and I'm more than happy to do that. But I feel like if I said to them, I think AI is something I don't agree with, so I'm not going to use it, and I suggest you don't use it either. Um, I I don't know. I mean, that message I think can come through, but I also think it's incumbent upon me to be able to know enough about it that I can provide accurate guidance about what the strengths and disadvantages are. And of course, everything evolves so quickly that what any of us think about it at one moment may quickly become complicated by newer developments as well. Kevin, do you have thoughts about that one?
yeah, I was just thinking about Cecile made a comment about, vendor interfaces. And there was a session the other day talking about the Primo Research Assistant and how a lot of libraries had decided not to implement it. And I wonder if that's where we can be. I mean, maybe it's a little different question, but that's where we can kind of maybe provide some guidance. And maybe we don't have to go all in on every AI tool. We can be a little selective. But
Yeah.
but as a systems librarian, I don't feel I can opt out of AI. I need to kind of be conversant with that.
And another flavor to that is a lot of people are using AI and not realizing it as these become
Yes.
totally
Yeah,
integrated into the platforms and systems we use.
that's a great
It'll be
point.
so difficult to avoid using AI completely.
There is a question in the Q&A that's more general in nature. Erica asks, what foreign languages do AI tools understand besides English and Chinese?
Mhm. Kevin, I'll throw that one to you. You're
Yeah, I
systems
think that,
librarian.
I think there are models that can work in many different languages right now. I know India is developing their own. Like it's kind of getting easier, I think, with like DeepSeek kind of showed like it doesn't have to be so expensive to train a model, and you can also fine tune models. I know I've thought about doing that myself with some data sets. So I think that, there are models available if you want a data set that's trained on more ethical, information sources, maybe not on Western focused sources. There are models that are, kind of trained on information to allow it to provide a different perspective. So I think we're going to have all sorts of flavors of AI as we go forward.
And the statistic I hear is that a lot of the major companies, ChatGPT and Gemini, Claude, Grok, Meta AI, um, around 30 languages or so are pretty high quality in terms of their ability to translate from one to another and produce generative content at a reasonable high level. And one of the cool things about AI is that it's being used in some contexts to help try to revive languages and language use. So, yeah, I'll stop there.
There's a lot of comments in the chat. I was trying not to read them all because they are sort of talking about the same thing that you were talking about. But let me just, Maria points out that it feels hard for a newcomer to determine at what point AI is doing all the work instead of being a tool, and also addressing concerns about users losing the ability to perform certain tasks with our own minds. And I know I've often focused some of my teaching around AI to students around not losing those critical thinking skills.
Yeah,
So that
that's
seems to be a
that,
concern.
that's kind of a good point. I was actually wrestling with that last night when we were doing this presentation. I was trying to update slides that we had developed using an AI tool, Gamma, and it was impossible just to edit this PowerPoint presentation. I had to go back to Gamma and try to run it back through the process. It took me about 5 times longer than it normally would have. So, yeah, I struggle with that too. When some tasks maybe aren't appropriate. I know I have a colleague really involved with sustainability, and some tasks we might ask AI to do, like a math, doing a math equation, are better for a calculator and maybe not appropriate for AI. So we do have to be cognizant of how and why we're using it.
Yeah, no, I love this question, Kamaria. It's something we need to seriously consider. And there's a lot of studies that are coming out now that are showing that knowledge workers they admit that they become over reliant on these tools pretty quickly, and they are seductive. And we're going to have to think carefully about what capabilities are important for us to maintain, and which are not, and which we should see ourselves willing to let go of for theoretically a higher level of engagement with ideas and creativity. Um, I don't know. But then can you have a higher level of engagement with ideas and creativity if you don't understand the basic nuances of how to do various processes? It's very
Yeah.
complicated issues.
Yeah, that's great. But I use the AI a lot to help with coding, like PHP and stuff. And I find I'm very successful with it, but I know PHP really well. So I wonder though, someone coming in without that knowledge, can you really vibe code your way to success? I don't know.
That's your next bestseller, Kevin. I love it.
There we
Uh,
go.
and David, that was a great comment to Camarina. I've heard that analogy too.
Mm,
That's a really good one.
yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess we're at the end of time. I'm happy to stay longer. I don't know what the rules are about
Yeah.
how we do.
I assumed Alicia would just kick us off when we're done. I don't know.
Well, there is another question in the Q&A window if you wanted to tackle that one. And yeah, if folks need to go, obviously you're welcome to leave. But if you have time to stay and chat, I say we can keep going. But the person in the Q&A said, I appreciate your work in this presentation. As a member of a group collectively represented in one of the big class action AI lawsuits, i.e. a tech giant that trained a major AI model on my work without my consent, I'm revolted by the idea that I'd be compelled to use a tool created based on the theft of my work. I've heard anecdotally that my situation is more common across the profession than is commonly discussed. Do you feel that folks like us, who feel our work was used inappropriately, should be willing to have a productive relationship with these tools or support patrons using them?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know, Jason, do you have a
Yeah,
perspective? I know I did look at the database that they say Llama was created on, kind of the database of kind of like um, kind of stolen copyrighted work, and two of my articles were in there as well. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like it's such a tool. I mean, I see such opportunities, and also like, sometimes I'm like, oh, that AI didn't help me there, but I don't know. It's interesting. And I think that's part of what we're struggling with as a committee when we look at, can we ethically opt out of AI, as a discipline.
yeah, yeah. Um, what my hope is that we will, as Kevin mentioned, there are some tools that are being developed more ethically and sourced on different material. And I'm hoping that there'll be such an outrage at the idea of this intellectual theft and systems that can reproduce content in the style of someone else and basically obviating their ability, that might not be the right word, but infringing on their ability to make a living, and stealing their identity intellectually, that we will demand systems that are not trained on those types of sources. Uh, I hope so. And
Yeah.
but that is a great question. What do we do in the meantime? Um,
We've been sitting down and creating a document on guidelines on how we use AI within our library, like when we use it and how we use it. And, we've talked a lot about keeping not only a human in the loop, but an expert human in the loop. If we're going to use it to catalog, make sure there's an expert cataloger who reviews things. And we've also talked about creating a rubric for when we turn on an AI interface. So I don't know. We're trying to. We stole that idea from JSTOR. They're big on that kind of um, those guideline documents. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to navigate this. It's going to be interesting to see where we are in 10 years, trying to navigate this space.
and I hope I've heard some efforts to do things like remunerate people on for when their data sets are being used. Um, I don't know how they're going to know when a particular generative output was leveraging that particular input. There would be no way to do that that I can think of. But there are those desires for all the benefits and the huge amounts of money that these tools are generating for various companies to be shared more broadly. But that still doesn't get beyond the fundamental problem that if you don't want your work to be used to train these models, you should have the ability to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, and it's such a problem. Like I know our systems like all of us, I think our institutional repositories are getting hammered by these bots that are crawling, desperate for content, and like nothing's sacred. So it's really kind of I don't know. It's really set AI in our discipline where we value intellectual property on a it's put a dark shadow over any potential benefit that might come from it. Yeah, and I think Rachel's question, like, how will expert catalogs exist after the pre-AI catalogers retire? Yeah, I don't know, because I guess maybe that's up to education, like our academia, we need to make sure we're still training the core concepts and bringing people up to a level where they can then use AI effectively. I don't know.
Uh, in a lot of ways, the advent of AI really makes the need for expertise much more pronounced, and we need it all the time. But the AI is so persuasive in the way it presents information, um, and experts are needed to be able to discern whether or not there are hallucinations happening and whether things are being appropriately contextualized. So I just hope that we continue to treasure that level of expertise as a human in the loop working with these tools, so that they are tools that experts can use to improve their own work, but they're not going to hopefully replace that expertise.
Yeah, well, maybe it's up to us in the libraries to ensure we value, like to Rachel's point, the catalogers, and that we think it's important to have catalogers, and we make that known to our organizations that we need to have these professionals on staff to, as Jason said, work maybe in concert with AI, but in an expert way. I don't know.
Well, there are no new questions popping up right now. Still some comments coming in about the ongoing conversation. But if anybody had any last questions that they wanted to ask, even out loud, if you wanted to raise your hand, we can let you speak the questions. You don't have to type the question if you'd like. Otherwise, it seems we've
I will say all sorts of kind things about catalogers, as long as they don't ask me to catalog. But I guess, Jason, our document will be out some point in the future.
Right. Yeah, I don't know exactly when. We have to run it through a few levels of approval. Once we get it to the point where our committee is satisfied with it, and that's actually, I think, maybe the harder barrier. But hopefully within the next couple of months, it'll be available. And I'd like to make sure that we have another round of sharing it with the community for feedback before we say this is the final published version. And I think we'll do that on some level. I don't know how much time we'll be able to allocate for that level of feedback, but I think it's important that since it's different enough from our initial version, I think it would be wise for us to make sure we give people another chance to look at it again.
Will people be able to keep an eye on the task force website to see when the next draft version comes out?
That's a good point.
Yeah,
We could ask that the ACRL's committee page add that information. Yeah, that's a good idea.
I imagine when it does come out, it'll be well publicized. And we can always, let Gail organizers know, and maybe there's a distribution list here we can plug into.
Yeah, there's a Gale Google group, so you could post it through there as well. So folks here, hopefully if you've signed up for that Google group, you'll get that notification when it comes in.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very, very much, Jason and Keven. We definitely appreciate your presentation, and I think that was a lot of amazing information. And thank you everybody for attending. We still have 64 people hanging on even 10 minutes after the end of the time, but this has been great. And I hope everybody enjoys the last couple of hours of the conference this week. And we'll hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, and we'll post our slides directly to our session. Thanks,
All right,
Alicia.
thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, likewise.